How do you land a technical interview? Today, we'll talk about that with a veteran of the form today on Culture Builder Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm here. I'm the CEO of the Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. I'm here for Culture Builder Live, conversations on building better companies. We're doing something a little bit different today, taking a look at the technical job interview. Many of the companies we report on use them. Many of our readers are involved in them. So we wanted to take a little bit of closer look about what's changing and how to prepare and perform your best on them. To do that, I'm joined by Felix Matathias, old friend. He is a veteran. He's had a fair share of technical interviews in his career. He's been through Bloomberg, Uber, PNC. This summer he's transitioning to Facebook. He also has a PhD in nuclear physics. Maybe we'll dabble into that. But first, I want to welcome Felix. Felix, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. It's really exciting.
Yeah, well, you've done the technical interview, and so we thought you'd have a good handle on this. Let's start with some of the basics, both for on the employer side, but also the job seeker side. Why is a technical interview so darn different than all other interviews? We talk about it as a very distinctive thing. Set the foundation about why the stakes feel a little bit different.
Yeah, it is an interview, which is these are long interviews. This is interviews that may take days and even take months. It's different because you're actually asked to perform during the interview what you do in their actual job. I've thought about it many times. I have many friends who are doctors, and I've asked them, "Hey, how do you guys interview? Is it that someone, you're a surgeon, that someone asks you to do surgery for a few times so they can see how you're doing?" I said, no. This is not what is, what is being asked for us. It's being asked whether we're a cultural fit, and we talk about the salary and the hours, and that's what it is. I said, how is it in your field? I said, well, in my field, I still have to write algorithms, and it's very, very technical, and you're actually being asked to do coding, and you're asked to you ask a lot of behavioral questions. So it's very different in that respect, and it's a very demanding process, particularly for the companies, for the FAANG companies, for Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and all this. It's this very long process that takes a lot of preparation.
And we've heard one trend is companies sometimes trying to trim back that time when they are in particularly demanding hiring environments. But you're right that even in the best case, these are hours long. Interesting. Okay, so let's get into it. You have done your fair share of technical interviews at the highest levels. So talk to me a bit about how do you prepare for a technical interview?
Yeah. So first, I'd like to start by saying that I don't like being interviewed. I don't like being on the spot. I just feel that, okay, people are trying to figure out if I'm smart or not, but doesn't my career prove that? And there is something that I've caught myself is that there's a thread in the back of my mind many times, and I'm not sure if you're doing well here or not. And I've actually agonized about that, and I said, okay, how can I become a better at interviews when I'm being interviewed? And there is one answer, and that is practice. And I thought that, how are we going to practice not being stressed, or don't think that you're not doing well. And I tested it, and it is actually practice. So there are many things that people can do for that. There are things that people can prepare on the various aspects of an interview. So let's take a step back. If we talk about the big software houses, their interviews typically have to do, you have to do your screening first, which is a technical screening, some questions, a little bit of coding. But assuming that you've done that and you've been successful in that, when you go in and you have the big interview, which is probably 6 hours of interviews, you have two aspects, particularly for the senior people and managers and senior leads and senior tech leads. You have the behavioral aspect of the interview. You have at least one or two interviews on the behavioral aspect. And then you have 2 or 3 interviews on the very technical aspect. You can prepare for both of them, and there are various tools that people could use for that. So obviously, we can start from the technical point of view. Lead code is a a website that people use a lot. There's a lot of problems out there. They go in and they solve algorithmic problems. And I would say, yes, you have to do it. Now, you cannot fake it, really. Like, if you're not a good developer, I mean, if you don't have an experience, if you're a junior developer, you cannot just go to lead code and solve the problems for a senior developer, because what happens is these problems have follow-ups, and then the interviewee just keeps probing deeper and deeper and deeper. So don't fake it. If you have to interview for the right level. But definitely, the issue that we have with the technical interviews is that we're being asked questions that we don't use it on a daily basis. So we don't do things like a breadth first search on a graph on your daily basis. You'll just pick up a library and there you have it. You're not going to really implement any search algorithms or any sorting algorithms. And these are the things that you do in college, and you forget about them. So that's what is important to prepare, because depending on the seniority, you might be asked these questions. And these sites like Lead Code, CoderPad, etc. These you can actually practice on them, and refresh your memory. Okay, how do I do sorting? How do I searching? How I do dynamic programming, which is typically is asked by Google, Facebook, Amazon, and all of this, which don't typically solve these problems on a daily basis at work. So you can prepare for that. In my case, for example, when I was interviewing for Facebook, I carved out my weekends and I used to go to Pittsburgh Public Library, and I was hacking away. Then, in terms of the technical aspect, in addition to the coding, where in my case, sometimes you're very senior. There are particular companies like Facebook that will ask you to do coding, and Google asked me to do a code review. So you have that. What definitely you're going to be asked to do is you're going to be asked to do design. And again, your career and everything that you worked in during your career is what really propels you and helps you during that part. But it doesn't hurt to also go and look at how modern systems are designed. For example, when you might be working in a place where you don't have cloud-based systems, or you don't have big data architectures, and it's good to go or you may have not used a NoSQL database. So it's good to go and look at some of these design aspects in some websites. The one I recommend is Educative. They have a wonderful course. It's called Grokking the System Interview. And they have questions like design Facebook, design Twitter, design Uber. These are pretty hard systems to design, particularly when you're under the gun to deliver within an hour, or less than an hour, actually. So again, there you can do a lot of preparation. And sure, if you are an architect with a lot of experience, you might not have to do a lot of it, but it's good to just bring things in memory by doing this preparation.
Felix, can I just
Sure.
interject, just because it's super helpful? Well, one, I want to note, one of our LinkedIn Live viewers, Kate Grass, friend of the show, does want to point out you don't need a PhD in nuclear physics to pass a technical interview, but it helps. So yeah, I mean, Kate,
actually, yeah, I've actually found that having a PhD in nuclear physics is probably not a good thing to have for an interview. Because PhDs typically try to come up with the best solution, with the most efficient solution, and that's not typically what sometimes you have to do. First, you have to solve the problem, and then second round, you're looking for efficiencies. And actually, that's the same thing when I first started at Bloomberg. I think one of my traits was, I'm not going to release something until it's perfect, and that's not, and something that was a motto at Bloomberg is that the better is the enemy of the good enough. So if you're good enough, you're good to go. You don't need to be better than that. Anyways, back to the
yeah, no, that is interesting. I just want to chunk out these steps of you preparing, because I think it's super helpful for folks to kind of break this apart. Because you said in what you said a couple things that I want to separate. One, I really appreciated the very tactical. I mean, given someone of your experience level, it's interesting to me that you still are like, I want to know what tools am I going to be used in this interview? What are the processes? Are we going to be behavioral questions or not? And I think of it like, you're taking the the SATs, you want to know what pencil you're using just because you don't want the pencil to distract you. You just want to remove the things. You're trying to be as focused on your skill level as you can be. So, just to be clear, is that those are things that you can ask either a hiring manager or a recruiter, depending on the company size. Those are questions that you're able to ask. Hey, what should I know to?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
That's a great question. Absolutely. And you should ask. You should know what are you going to be doing, what are you going to be using, for example, for your design interview. So Facebook preferred Excalibur, and I said, I'm actually more, versatile in Google drawing. Is that a problem? They said, "Yeah, that's fine. We can use that. And then spend a lot of time, if you don't know any of these tools, spend a lot of time designing in Google Draw or Excalibur or Microsoft Visio. And what I was doing is that I would when I was solving a problem like design Twitter, design Uber, etc., I would actually practice it on Google Draw, and put all the boxes and put all of the arrows, because here's the thing: you don't have the ability anymore of the on-site interview where you have a whiteboard, with an eraser, and then you can go in and draw and put your ideas. In this era of online interviews, you feel confined by the tools, and that's exactly what you said. You have to spend time so that you don't feel confined, and you are able to use, even, for example, selecting how to color, or where to find the database little graph, for when you're designing a database, and the arrows. You don't want to be wasting time. You want to be spending all of your time just solving the design problem. Or, for example, for CoderPad that I had to use, get familiar with it. Start coding in that tool if you need to. So these are the things that helped a lot, so you don't have to think about them during an online interview.
Right. So let me yeah, sorry, I want to keep so your tools. Okay, I've asked and I've gotten and I've prepped some work. You also just mentioned, tell me a little bit more. You mentioned, spending some time in the Pittsburgh Public Library. I just love those sorts of stories.
Mm-hmm.
Was that for this, when you were going through the journey that ended up with Facebook? Maybe just give me a little bit, like, why were you going to a public library? What was helpful for you to do that, and what were you doing in those moments?
First of all, getting away from my kids is so that's basically isolation, and it sets a schedule. So I knew that I would be the first person who would open the library probably 9 a.m. on a Saturday and stay until 5. It gives you a momentum. It gives you a schedule. It gives you a plan, because this has to be, if you want to be successful, particularly in the FAANG type of companies, it's a process. It's a process, and you have to practice. Particularly if you're someone like me who doesn't really like it, and it's just particularly had to step up my game for entering, in this type of companies. So I used to go there, and yes, I had my own little space. You could rent an actual booth, and you're in full isolation, and used to go there 9 to 5, Saturdays, Sundays, and it was very helpful. I knew.
And what are you doing? Just give a little window. What are you're 9 to 5. What are you literally doing in that isolation booth at Pittsburgh Public Library?
Right. What I would do, I would solve coding problems. I would solve design. So I would start design Instagram, right? And I would spend an hour without looking, without any help, and just putting together the components of design. Then I would see, okay, let me see, I solve it like this. I would go to the educative website and see, okay, how have they done it? And then I would also go and kind of refresh myself about, what was the CAM theorem? What is eventual consistency? Or what are, some of the things that I hadn't used lately in the last couple of years at my present job. So there was a lot. I would start with the problem, I would solve it, and then I would just do a little bit more on theory. I will just read some articles, relevant articles. A lot of YouTube, there's a lot of resources on YouTube. There's a lot of ex-Googlers and ex-Facebook guys that actually have started companies and about
Mm,
helping people practice these interviews, in these interviews. And there's a lot of material out there. Chris, I also want to mention another thing that we don't, because I think it's very important, particularly for the people who are doing senior interviews, senior managers or engineering managers or senior technical engineers, senior engineers, etc. And that is the behavioral aspect of the interview. We shouldn't
mm,
leave that, we shouldn't forget about that. And the behavioral aspect of the interview, obviously, if you haven't lived through it, if you don't have the experiences, it's very difficult, and you shouldn't come up with a fake experience,
mm,
because it's very easily someone who will probe deeper will know about it. So questions like, tell me about a time where you struggled to do something. Tell me about a time where you disagreed with someone. How did you resolve it? Tell me about a time that you made a mistake. Tell me about a time that you got constructive feedback. So these are, if you go out, there's a lot of websites that have this type of questions. And I'm not saying that you practice them in order to come up with situation. Again, that will never work. Just to remind yourself, after so
mhm,
many years of working with people, and I've managed so many teams, so many personalities, and you want to kind of put this roster together. Okay, let me think. Who was the most difficult person I ever worked with? Why was it difficult? And also put some notes on the mistakes that you've made. People, you will be asked about these things, and you will say, "Nah, I never make mistakes, and my design has always been perfect, and I'm the best people manager, and I've never made a mistake about choosing who my next team lead is going to be." I think these are red flags. So definitely there is preparation for that behavioral aspect, which is very much used by, I think Amazon has pioneered it, and Google and Facebook, they're just using it very, very,
mm.
prominently in these interviews.
It's a helpful addition. I'm going to lose you here in a minute. Before I turn to a final question, maybe just with that great background, I wonder if you could almost help summarize that. If a friend of yours comes and says, I got this big technical interview next week, I'm nervous about it. What's like the final checklist to say, here's how you're going to nail this interview?
Mhm.
What is that quick hit high level? Here's the like the 90-second.
Then
This is
I
what you
say,
got to go do.
first of all, work with your recruiter. The bigger the company, the bigger the help you're going to be getting from your recruiter. It's actually a symbiotic relationship. They want you to succeed. So understand what is the interview going to consist of. After you do that, then prepare for each part of the interview.
Mm,
Prepare for the behavioral, prepare for the technical, prepare for the design, and make sure. Here's a big advice, that if you need to prepare and you need time to prepare, be open about it and say, hey, I don't think I'm going to be ready in 3 weeks. I need probably a couple of months to prepare.
mm,
So be open about it, and they will honor it most of the times. They say, well, maybe there's many candidates for the position. We need to interview now, so you have to call your shots there. But if you need time, ask for it. Don't be embarrassed to say, I need to prepare for it. It's a big deal for me, so I need more time. Let's do this in a couple of months.
interesting. That is great. That's super great. Anything specific about the Facebook interview process that you were like maybe just impressed by? Was there something that you're like, you know what, people should know this, or any like insight that you
The most impressive thing about the Facebook interview is the support from my recruiter, and I can
mm,
tell him my name, Jed Ackerman, who was always there. And sometimes he would call me, "Hey, are you preparing? Hey,
mm.
are you starting? Are you ready? Get ready." Their recruiting, their recruiting organization there is superb. I would say
Mm,
I've never met an organization like that, and Jed has been, huge help for that. So I was really impressed about at Facebook. We even they again was very impressive. They set up 45 minutes so you can talk with another manager before your interview.
mm,
Yes, and then they have I think every Wednesday, before while you're preparing for interview, they have like a mini course about what is it like, and they give you
mm,
information about it, very open, and all the candidates join. anonymously. I said, "Wow, that's a lot of help. I really appreciate it. It really made a lot of difference." So
Mm.
I was very impressed by their process.
It makes a lot of sense, the idea that they want you at their best. They want you at your best, so they know they're recruiting the best.
Chris, that's exactly the way that they expressed it, the way that you just mentioned it.
All of that. So send us out with you've had a 20-year career, you've at some of the highest levels of technical roles. Where have you seen technical interviews go, and where do you think this is going? What's the future of technical interviews that folks should be preparing for?
Sure. Good. That's a great question. Definitely, the pandemic has changed the way that we interview. It's a different type of interview. It's a new breed of interview. You have to, again, as we mentioned, you have to prepare using tools that you didn't have to use before. You don't have the whiteboard, the real whiteboard. It's a virtual whiteboard.
Mm.
So you don't have that, electricity in the room when you get someone, so that's definitely a trend that we've seen it and probably will continue. I think back in the days when I was starting my career, a lot of interviews was about, do you know the language well?
Mm.
Particularly was C and C++, and there was a lot of probing, edge cases. Oh, tell me what happens when there is an exception thrown at the constructor. I don't maybe in a very senior level you might get these questions, but I think where companies have moved is actually solve problems, solving how you solve a problem like in real time. And I think what we've seen is actually use a tool like CoderPad or other tools, and I want to see you coding live. And that I think has been very successful for companies to see how people will actually perform and under stress, and they see their actual coding skills. So I think that these are, things that have changed and they're here to stay.
Mm. That's great. Super interesting. Felix, I so appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. That is this week's Culture Builder Live. I'll make sure to drop links below the video to some of the resources that Felix called out. This, of course, will also be recapped on Technically with additional resources. And if you're watching this after we went live, right here should be a link to a bunch of other Culture Builder Live interviews for more resources. Felix, thanks for being here. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We will see you next time.